On May 31st, 2003, the Raven roller coaster at Holiday World in Santa Claus, Indiana was operating normally. The park was hosting its annual Stark Raven Mad Coaster Enthusiast event, named after one of their major roller coasters, the Raven, which was open late that night for the event. Around 8 p.m., the ride was loaded with riders and dispatched from the station. As the ride was completing its normal layout, one rider, seated in the back row, was ejected from the train. They proceeded to fall 40 feet to the ground where they were killed. The train returned to the station and the ride was shut down for investigation. The investigation would be headed by the Indiana Department of Fire and Building Services and would examine every aspect of the ride and the event to determine what had happened. The ride was a Custom Coasters International wooden coaster that had been installed at the park in 1995. At the time, it featured just one train manufactured by Philadelphia Toboggan Company, or PTC. Trains in this style could be found on many other roller coasters around the world and had been proven to operate safely. The ride's layout featured sharp turns and weightless airtime hills throughout, making the ride well regarded for being thrilling and fun. This reputation is what eventually led to the establishment of the Stark Raven Mad Coaster Enthusiast event, where the accident had occurred. The investigation would determine that the rider had been ejected from the coaster as it traveled over hill number 5, a large weightless moment on the ride near the middle of the ride experience. This hill was over 40 feet or 12 meters above the ground at its highest point. The investigation then turned to the ride's restraints. The ride featured the standard restraints provided by PTC at the time, as well as a redundant seatbelt. The standard restraint was a ratcheting style lap bar that had a single bar on the side of the restraint near the car's opening. When engaged properly, this would restrict the upwards motion of a rider, as well as prevent them from being thrown out the side of the car. The ride also featured a seatbelt that served as a redundant backup to the main lap bar. This seatbelt was adjustable and could be tightened, loosened, or unbuckled by the rider at any time. The investigators interviewed the operators that had been working the ride at the time. The operators stated that the involved rider had been on the cycle prior to the accident. They recalled during that cycle checking both the involved rider's seatbelt and lap bar. The cycle prior to the accident was then dispatched and operated normally. At the end of this cycle, there was no one in line for the involved rider's seat, so they chose to ride again. The operators recalled again checking the involved rider's seatbelt and lap bar, and ensuring that both were in place and secure. This cycle was then dispatched. The investigators examined the train in the station after the accident and found that the seat where the involved rider had been sitting had its seatbelt unbuckled, with the ends of the seatbelt tucked into the seat padding. They also found the lap bar to be in the lowest position, but this was expected, as with no rider underneath, ride forces would push the lap bar into this position. Unfortunately, no operator could recall exactly how far the involved rider's lap bar was prior to the accident. The Raven had a ratcheting style lap bar restraint with a set number of possible positions. The ride did not feature any kind of seat sensor or other method to verify all restraints were at a minimum allowed position prior to dispatch. This was not required under relevant ASTM standards for rides with forces like Raven. An independent ride inspector was brought to the ride and ran several tests, including accelerometer testing. This testing confirmed that the ride was operating within its designed G-force range. The inspector also did a thorough check of all restraints on the ride. Every restraint was found to be in proper condition. Investigators were also able to find several witnesses that were not on the ride that witnessed the start of the accident cycle, thanks in part to the ride passing directly next to Holiday World's parking lot. These witnesses stated that they saw a rider in the back row of the train nearly standing up as the ride went over the first drop. This rider would later confirm to be the rider involved in the accident. With it now clear that the rider may have intentionally defeated their restraints in order to have a more thrilling ride, the investigation reviewed Holiday World's practices and their marketing of the event. The investigation found all operator training to be properly documented, the ride's operations manual to be complete, and the ride to be operating within manufacturer guidelines. With the event being advertised as a coaster enthusiast event, it was expected to draw riders who were experienced with the ride, and may have felt that they could ride in more thrilling positions due to this experience. Holiday World had actually been prepared for this and had sent out a warning to all attendees, stating that any attempt to interfere with safety mechanisms on any ride would subject the violator to removal from the park. Additionally, the ride included several written warnings in the queue lines, as well as verbal spiels from the ride operators informing riders to remain seated with their restraints fastened during the ride. The independent investigator concluded their report by stating that, quote, "If the rider would have been properly seated in their seat with either one of the restraining devices properly used, the rider would not have left the roller coaster vehicle, and the rider engaged in conduct contrary to the rules of operation and in disregard of verbal instructions and posted warnings. These actions resulted in the rider placing their body in a position that the ride was not designed to carry human passengers. Once in this undesigned riding position, the forces exerted on the body resulted in the rider leaving the passenger carrying area of the car and falling through the wooden structure to the ground. The injuries sustained resulted in the unfortunate loss of the rider's life." End quote. With this information uncovered, we can now reconstruct the accident. On May 31st, 2003, around 8 p.m., the Raven at Holiday World was operating normally. The ride was loaded with riders, and each rider's seatbelt and lap bar were checked by the operators. The ride was dispatched and completed a cycle as normal. As this cycle came back into the station, one rider in the back row noticed that their row was empty and decided to ride the coaster again. Their restraint was unlocked, then relocked, and checked by the operators again. This cycle was then dispatched. As the ride was climbing the lift hill, the rider in the back row unbuckled their seatbelt and tucked it in between the seat cushions. They then used the extra room between their body and the lap bar, which was likely not touching the rider's body when the train left the station, to stand up. Due to the lap bar's positioning, they likely could not stand completely up, but they were free of the ride's restraints. As the ride completed the fifth hill and descended a 40-foot drop, the rider was thrown from the train. They fell through the ride's wooden structure and were killed after impacting the ground. The investigation would ultimately clear Holiday World of any wrongdoing. The investigators concluded that the ride was safe and was being operated in compliance with ASTM standards and within the manufacturer's recommendations. It is important to note that PTC did not specify a minimum position for the lap bar restraints in their owner's manual, just that the restraints must be secure. This meant that even if the lap bar had been set objectively too high on the rider, they were not in any violations of manufacturer recommendations. Many modern manufacturers, however, do require that restraints contact a rider's body. Again, it's not clear that the restraint was set too high in this situation, but given the events of the accident, this is a possibility. The Raven continues to operate today, now with a second train added to improve capacity. Both of these trains feature nearly identical restraints to what was used in 2003, and there have been no further incidents on the ride. Holiday World themselves prides themselves on having some of the best ride operations of any regional amusement park. This is indeed true, as they were one of the first independent parks to contract with International Ride Training, or IRT, to audit and help train their ride operators. Today, the park continues to operate and even host coaster enthusiast events. In fact, the same event still runs today under the name Hollywood Nights. Though the park has continued to grow, they have not forgotten the lessons learned from this unfortunate accident. They continue to enforce that riders at these events ride with the restraints in their proper position and that their operators are consistently following the policies they have set in place. If you'd like to learn more about this accident, feel free to read the accident report linked below. Additionally, I have every accident report I have ever used in a video over on my website. These can also be great resources for learning about ride accidents. As always, if you enjoy the factual and non-dramatic angle these videos take compared to others on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe so that these videos are pushed to more viewers. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.